Greetings, everybody. It's Jim, the Unshaven One. A few months ago, I went to Steve Jackson and I said, since I'm doing this whole series on GURPS, hey, could you send me the PDFs for the Conan series for the pre-programmed adventures? And he did, and I was really excited about it. So much so that it got some light reading to do. And these little mini graphic novels, you could say, are really written really well. And the thing is, unlike a lot of the things in the 80s and the 90s as far as comic books, a lot of the time I can't go back to them. I can leaf through comic books and say, oh, I remember that or I remember that. But the writing was definitely more for teenagers and stuff. And I'm like, wow, I can't just fathom going through all that. But these are written that I think an adult can enjoy. They're basic, they're complete machismo, as you would imagine. But there's really good reading material. And I'm glad to say that the books that I'm about to review actually still reflect that feel of the way the dialogue went and everything. So today, I'm going to be going over with you my review of a synopsis of all 4 of the Conan pre-programmed adventures for GURPS. All right, so there are 4 books in all when it comes to this, and I'm going to be doing an overall synopsis here of all 4 of them and how it relates to GURPS, and then I'm going to go over each individual adventure separately because each one of them brings something different to the game, and I'm not going to give any spoilers away. So these videos are going to be a little shorter, but there's going to be 5 videos in all. So let's just go over what makes overall these special. So GURPS Conan's written in 3rd edition rules, okay? That means passive defense is a thing, which you can completely ignore if you're in 4th edition. However, if you ever wanted to experiment to see what it would be like, I highly suggest it. Now, mind you, it only pops up in certain times because this is the world of Conan. There's a lot of light armor, and, they want you to, as Conan, slay people with one shot, and that happens here a lot more often. But it does come up, and one thing I would absolutely say that my video on the scale of GURPS is justified. This really shines. This is truly a solo adventure. Not that you're playing it by yourself, but you're really playing one character. And in other systems, it would be really dry. I roll, you roll, that's it. Here, there are decisions to be made every turn, and the creative way that you get in different situations, in these adventures especially, make one-on-one battles different every time. And I'll get more in that with the separate adventures. Again, I'm not going to give any spoilers out, but I'll give you some examples of some ideas that they're going through. But bottom line is, you really feel like you're in a sword fight, and it really feels like Conan too, because Conan's like a 500-point character. So he's not just going around, it is just like the movies. He's slaying people with one shot all the time. And you have to do that with GURPS if you're going to make a cinematic character. Now, there is a caveat I have that I actually have a problem with GURPS in general, and it comes to the way they show you characters. Now, here it's fine, because in the first adventure, Beyond Thunder River, they give you a standard character sheet for Conan, right? Everything's there, everything's ready to play, boomity, right? However, in every other module, and it does matter because the Conan changes. These are in different eras in Conan's life, so the stats are different. But in the other ones, they give you this. They give you this typical kind of GURPS stat block, which is ugly. It's somewhat readable, but like when you get down to skills especially, yes, it's all in alphabetical order, but it's in alphabetical order on the character sheet too. So nothing's really gained. And if anything, it's just harder to read because everything's right there, and you kind of, you're losing your mind even in alphabetical order trying to find stuff. It's just not as easy. And I just don't like it. Now, the reason they do this in GURPS, I know, is because of space, right? Usually, when you have a character sheet like this, there's no room for writing backgrounds or anything special about it. It's just statistics, right? But here, generally, when they have a character like this, they have information about Conan in the bottom right-hand corner, or their character in the bottom right-hand corner. So I understand why they kind of do it. However, part of me just says, forget all that and just go with this. Or if anything, and I'm going to go over this in a future video, but if anything, they could just shorten this down to maybe 3/4 of the page, and if you really, really insisted on having information on background information of the character, then you'd have that last third of the page to do that with. But you could easily shorten this down to a small degree, maybe. Use a smaller font. I bet you there will be a way to do it, or at very least, maybe get rid of the picture here in the middle, and they could do it. But in these adventures, though, regardless of what you would do for GURPS in general, these adventures definitely needed a character sheet, because you're not going to transfer all this just for one solo adventure that only lasts, maybe an hour and a half. You're not going to go through all that trouble, So this was actually not the greatest play in the world. So one of the things I also like is these adventures can be definitely molded for your own campaign easy enough, right? They're all pretty short. Actually, I'll get into that in a little bit. But I mean, they could, unless they're familiar with the land setting of Conan and stuff, you can use the names and they wouldn't be any wiser. But even if they were, all you have to do is just change the names and you're fine. So definitely, and you don't have to use the cinematic 500-point characters that that Conan is either. You could easily just say, hey, let's make 3 adventures for 150 and kind of go at it, which might actually be more interesting in a way, because Conan, he's Conan, and this is really cinematic, and I'll get into that in a bit because it's kind of cinematic, but it's kind of not. But at the same time, 3 characters would have a wider breadth of skills to choose from, because the adventures are definitely written as if they weren't writing for Conan necessarily. When it comes to skills and stuff that are available, things that you can do, they just said, if you got this, you can do this, this, or this, or this. So they did write it for Conan, but they didn't write it assuming that Conan was the only character that could play the game. So definitely kudos for them on the design of that. So as I mentioned, it's cinematic, but yet not cinematic. It's cinematic in a way that they've pumped Conan so far up that, he's slashing people left and right. It's going to be very rare that he loses a fight. And so it should be. It's Conan, right? But at the same time, they have insta-deaths. You make a decision, you lose a roll, and all of a sudden Conan's dead. I was remembering Tunnels and Trolls, the guys at Flying Buffalo. They did a lot of solo adventures for Tunnels and Trolls, and they even wrote a book about it, and I read it, and they said, look, if you're going to do something like that where you really want to insta-kill them, but don't just insta-kill them, roll some dice, make it massive damage if you have to. But the thing is, I understand why they didn't do it, because even if, and I don't want to give the spoiler away or anything like that, they would have to do some massive, even more damage because of the way what happened. Because Conan's got a 19 strength, and in GURPS, you don't roll for a death check until -19, which I'll go over that sometime. I always found that for a game that's really based on reality a little bit funny, because it seems like, wow, if a guy goes unconscious, you really just have to keep stabbing him to even make more points, enough for them to start making their first death roll, which is interesting. You can modify it, I'm sure. But just having that as the default was a little bit weird for me. But it seems anticlimactic for Conan to have any kind of insta-death. If anything, I would think, if Conan fails or anything, it should be just like the new narrative forms of how they play games here nowadays. It's like you're not dead, but it's a hindrance, or maybe you did lose the adventure, but you're not dead and something bad happens. It's a hindrance, right? Instead of just an instant death, because he certainly isn't dying from fighting. Now, each adventure has its own take on how to make their adventure special. And one of the things you can do, and you see this also in some of the adventures in the fantasy trip as well, they try to make like esoteric and rules that you don't usually use, like mounted combat, to throw you off rather than just a regular sword fight and stuff like that, to really get you out of your comfort zone, right? But there are some really ingenious ways they make things a little bit different, and some of the creativity. And so I like that. I'm going to be going over that with you on when I go over the separate adventures themselves. Again, no spoilers on them. But the thing is, guys, if you want the long story short, they're only $7 a piece, available on Warehouse 23, and you should just go over and buy them all right now and have a lot of fun. And I'll see you next video.